What's up, my YouTube friends? I am Jeremy, your host here for the next, I don't know how long this is gonna go on for. A few minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, who knows? But what I do wanna talk to you guys about is four-wheel drive. We know that you guys love four-wheel drive, and we know that you guys maybe are like, do I want it? Do I need it? And if I do want it or do need it, we're gonna talk about the big thing today, which is straight axle versus IFS. So we have a Ford in one corner, in the red corner. We're gonna go red corner, I don't know, red corner we have the Ford straight axle four-wheel drive, and in the blue corner we have the Chevy, we have Velocis coming in with the IFS front suspension. Now, a little bit different suspension, but we're gonna kind of jump into these things. We wanna talk to you guys about the four-wheel drive, about all the different things. You know, everyone has their opinion, whether it is good or bad, and I'm just gonna kind of give you my opinion and my 2 cents. And if you guys, I would love to hear more from you guys if you have a four-wheel drive, whether it be a straight axle or an IFS front suspension. What did you do? How do you like it? Therefore, you guys can help out the people that are looking in order to purchase their first four-wheel drive or possibly build their first four-wheel drive. You guys might be able to help them out. There it is. Let's jump into these things. All right, guys, so typically when you are converting your four-wheel drive van, whether it's already been converted or you're thinking about converting it, usually there's two types of four-wheel drive conversions on these Ford vans when you have a straight axle setup. So typically in a straight axle van, you're either going to have a coil spring or a leaf spring, and those are what are going to hold up the vehicle. It has nothing to do with the shock. All your spring is doing is holding the vehicle at your ride height that you want to maintain. Now, one thing that a lot of people like about the leaf springs is they are very easy to install. It just takes a couple of purchases. So if you're thinking about doing one of these kits at home, that's what people like about it, is the simplicity of it. It's very simple. Or you could also go with a kit like Expo Van Kit, who uses a coil spring and like a radius arm or track rod setup in order to give you a little bit better ride on a coil spring. So that's a little bit about the setups that you're going to typically see in a Ford, and you may possibly see them in a Chevy. I've not really seen many coil spring four-wheel drive setups in a Chevy, and maybe you have one. Tell me what you think and how you like it. I love hearing what you guys have to say. So on this particular setup here, we've added a set of Fox shocks on here, and if you want to know more about this whole build that we've done, I'll make sure that I throw up a card, and I also post a link, because this is a killer Ford build that we've been working on here at WeldTech Designs. But what we really want to talk about is this whole straight axle versus IFS. So now that we kind of know how the vehicle is being supported, let's jump back to the front of this and start talking about the axle itself. All right, guys, so as I'm just gonna chill out down here, a little crisscross applesauce, and as we talk about the straight axle front end. So one thing that is nice about a straight axle front end, as we talked about, is the simplicity. If you're going to do the conversion yourself, makes it a lot simpler. Another reason a lot of people like a straight axle is going to be that there is less moving components in this front end. It's not as if when we get into the A-arm setup and you're going to start seeing how many moving components there are, and typically all those moving components are a possibility of failure, so depending on what you're doing with your rig. So you're going to see underneath, you're going to have one straight axle that goes all the way across this thing. And then you're going to also see we have our double leaf springs in here that are supporting it. So when we look in here, typically the only part of failure would be is if you were to break a leaf spring. That would be the one part of failure. Other than that, you're going to only have your upper and lower ball joints in the main part of your axle. Of course, you're also going to have tire rods, but you're going to also have tire rods on an IFS. Now, the benefit in a straight axle is that your tire rods are going to be longer, and therefore some people would say, well, you're going to have maybe less bump steer in this whole setup, and that just depends on how your front end is ultimately set up. And you can see that on this one, they've added a different knuckle in order to control what this would have. And then you're gonna have your main drag link that's gonna run all the way across from tire rod to tire rod. So if you are getting into crazy rocks, you obviously have the ability to damage this. And this is the one thing that I would say is if you are really going to be rock crawling or doing anything of that nature, that's where you may benefit a little bit more from a straight axle setup. And that's typically why you're going to see them on a lot of Jeeps or even like rock buggies, things of that nature. Again, we always get back into cost. The cost to do a straight axle front end is going to be significantly less. Hence, that's why a lot of people prefer them. So definitely, very cool. So I guess let's get into U-joints. So you have your U-joints in here, and that's going to be another thing that typically you're not going to be blowing through these because they're just spinning not at any type of crazy angle, which you were going to get possibly on an IFS front end, and we're going to talk about that when we get over to the other van. So overall, in this straight axle front end, you'll see that there just isn't a ton of moving components, and that's really nice. That makes these things really strong. Now here's the downfall of them. The downfall of the straight axle is that you're not going to get as nice of a ride out of it as you would the IFS front suspension. You're also, when you get into the leaf spring setup, definitely the leaf springs will never ride as nice as typically either whether you go with a coil spring setup or when you get into the IFS, you're going to get a little bit nicer, well, depending on the front end that you go with, it's going to be a lot nicer ride with the IFS too. But you can see that there's definitely some advantages, and I'm sure that I've missed some, and if I did, please, you know, guys, comment down below. I'm trying to think overall. So let's talk about that. Another difficult thing about these springs when you do have a leaf spring in the front end is how short the leaf springs are. So the shorter that these leaf springs are too, that's going to play a big role in how stiff or soft your vehicle rides. So the longer you can get these springs, obviously that's going to be a big plus, but you're also limited on a lot of room in the front of these as well. So you know, my experience with straight axles is pretty much all is going to be in Jeep and Broncos, that sort of setups. We don't do the straight axle conversions in any of the Fords or Chevys. This is just my observation, and when I get into these, what I observe, what I hear from people, and when I get to take these things on test drives, that's my 2 cents. So I think that's gonna pretty much wrap it up for the straight axle front end. I know I've got to have missed something. Please, guys, comment below if I've missed some of the other advantages to a straight axle front end, because I would love to hear from you guys. I've never owned one of these, so I'd love to hear what you guys think. And so now that we're kind of done talking about that, let's jump over and let's talk about an IFS front suspension. Let's talk about the good and the bad in that. All right, guys, so we're jumping underneath here. We're hanging out underneath this IFS front end. Now this is gonna be our coilover conversion, so this is cheating a little bit. Another one that would be nice to show you guys is a torsion bar conversion, but typically they're going to have about the same amount of moving parts in them. The only big difference on them is going to be how they're supported. So in this particular vehicle, we have a coilover shock. So we have a coil spring, which you could technically have on a Ford like we talked about. This one is just on the shock itself, so it's called a coilover shock, and that's going to be all supported in one big unit. Now that unit right there is holding up the whole vehicle right here, and then it's also going to control the ride in the vehicle as well. And this one cheats even more, is this has an adjuster on the reservoir in order to control the stiffness. So that's the cheating part of this front end, but now let's get into talking about the pros and cons of an IFS front suspension. So we got to start off with the bad, and the bad is that there's going to be a ton of moving parts in this, and that if you're going to be really hardcore off-roading, that is going to be a disadvantage, because where there's moving parts, there's the chances of parts breaking. So in this lower control arm, so on the straight axle we had an upper and lower ball joint. So now on this one we have a lower, what would be a typically it would be a bushing. In this there is a uniball. So on your pivot points down here at your lowers, you're going to have two moving parts right here in a bushing or in your pivot, and then down here you're going to have a lower ball joint right here, which is going to hold your knuckle onto your lower control arm. Now as we move to the top of this, you're going to have another upper ball joint, and then you're going to have two more additional pivots on here. So overall in this, we're having four moving components that are going to be constantly moving, which all have the possibility of breaking. Now in addition, on a IFS front suspension, your upper and lower ball joint are going to move 5 times more than they would move on a straight axle front end, therefore giving them an even more possibility of breaking, given the extreme nature that you are driving your vehicle. So all of these things are all possibilities or factors that need to be weighed in when you're equally, what's the word, when we're doing a comparison, you know? So we want to really show you like, hey, this is the good and the bad. So with all of these moving parts, there's definitely bad. So in most of the time, whether you have a bushing here or a uniball, this is not likely, this is not the biggest point of resistance in your front suspension. So typically on this, to see a bushing totally go out or a uniball go out is going to be very minimal. Where you will have failure is out here on this outer ball joint or outer pin. Now that's why on this particular front end, we've replaced the ball joints with a spherical bearing and a heat treated pin in there in order to basically just make this thing really strong. So that's going to be the biggest part of this. Now in here, you'll see that this is the next part when we get into your CVs. So this is your front axle, and your front axle is going to run from your front axle housing, and it's going to run out into your knuckle right here. And both of these points right here have CV joints in them, which will allow them to articulate as the suspension moves up and down. So the higher you have your vehicle, the more angle you will have on this CV joint right here. So that is another point of failure, that if you are going to be doing crazy rock crawling type stuff, this is a part that could fail due to extreme angles, because we're dealing with such a short distance. Now, can you make these things rad? Yes. Because another thing, if you guys have watched any of the Caden's videos where he went out to King of the Hammers, you'll notice that a lot of the new Ultra 4 cars are going to an A-arm setup. So for all of you people out there that say, oh, straight axle is the only way to go, those things are badass, A-arms suck on anything that you want to go rock crawling with, I would encourage you guys to either check out his videos or check out some of the new Ultra 4 cars that are all IFS front suspension. Now they're running something a little bit different, and that's going to be a portal in order to keep your axle straight all the time while also getting you a ton of ground clearance. Maybe that's got to come next on one of these Chevy kits. Who would love to see a set of portals for a van? Comment below. Let me know who would like to see a set of portals below. So that's when we're getting into talking about more moving parts. So you can see that overall we have 2, 4, 6 additional moving parts on an IFS front suspension that are going to be having more dramatic angle changes as the vehicle moves up and down. So for off-roading, there can be the disadvantages of that. Now, here's something else that we've done in here, and you'll see this limit strap that's put in here. So on a IFS front suspension, we're controlling it so that this doesn't have too much CV angle on it or drop out or max any of these ball joints and get too far down. And we're using the limit strap to control that on the downward movement. Now on the upward side of it, the shock has a built-in bump stop in it. So as it compresses, it's gonna control the compression in there and dampen the shock even more as it gets closer to compression. Another big advantage of this front end. So there's a lot going on here. So another thing that you'll see on this that you didn't see on the other one is you're going to also now have your steering, your tire rods right here. Now these tire rods are significantly shorter. So now with that shorter tire rod as well, it's going to also have more movement. More movement equals a chance to brake. Now we've upgraded all of these tire rods to the rare parts tire rods. And now here's something super important that I want you guys to know. If you have a four-wheel drive conversion, I don't care who it was done by, if you have a four-wheel drive conversion and it is IFS, independent front suspension, a similar setup, it could be a torsion bar, it can be a Quigley, it can be an advanced, there's lots of people out there doing that. This is a part that we sell right here that you can upgrade your puny little tire rods to, and this is going to be a direct bolt-on piece, and I will make sure that I put a link below so that if you have more questions about it, you can see. So in addition now, while we're talking about steering and moving components, because there's more of them. So in addition on this, we've upgraded it, the idler arm and the pitman arm and the idler arm bracket. So I want to make sure I disclose all the things that we've done to this in order to upgrade it and make it better, because there is a ton of things. Now here's where we're going to get into the big negative. All of these additional things cost money. And we know that if you're trying to build a four-wheel drive van on a budget, all of these little things that nickel and dime you to death, it can also discourage you away from wanting to convert it to four-wheel drive. And I get that, I completely understand that. And that's what we're here to kind of go over with you and talk to you guys about. Because there are less expensive ways to go about building this front end. It doesn't have to be a coilover front end. We can do a torsion bar front end. But if you also have a two-wheel drive, we also have all of these parts available for your two-wheel drive as well. And I'll make sure I put another link below. So we're really trying to make sure your two-wheel drive and your four-wheel drive, some of the major components that have a tendency to break or you can damage them, we're going to offer these parts to you. And what's great is if you do upgrade it and then upgrade to four-wheel drive later on down the road, it's all possible. So we've talked about all the disadvantages of all these moving parts on this vehicle. So a ton of moving parts compared to a straight axle front end, which we don't like. Now I've got you guys all scared and you're thinking, well, hell, why would I ever want to put all of this money or do this kit on my van if now there's way more parts and I would rather just go with a straight axle and it would be simple. And here's why. It's the ride quality. First of all, how many of you guys are really going and doing serious rock crawling with your van? If you're not doing serious rock crawling with your van, and I'll even, that's iffy. I mean, I don't really go rock crawling with it, but we have a lot of fun on the trails. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm going to throw up a card right here so you can go check out our TDS video of us actually off-roading this thing with a group of Jeeps. So, man, all right, mouthful. So here's the big plus. Every day that you drive your van, you're going to fall in love with this kit more and more and more. And the reason being is that the majority of you guys that have a van or have a four-wheel drive van or thinking about building a four-wheel drive van, the ride quality that you're going to get out of a IFS front suspension over a straight axle front suspension is going to be, and this is my opinion, 10 times better. The ride in this is extremely nice. You would not even know that it is a four-wheel drive. I mean, To me, I always say it drives like a Cadillac, and I'm still waiting for Christian to bring me his Porsche so we can go drive his Porsche to see, you know, we can compare the two. So Christian, that's a huge call out for you, buddy. I'm waiting on that Porsche. So a lot of things going on here, but the ride quality is going to be the biggest advantage in this IFS front suspension. Now here's another thing. Graded roads, washboard roads, dude, everything, you know, like everything about this front end is going to drive nicer than a straight axle front suspension. I'm ready, let's go on a trip. And this is where I'm talking about. Other than rock crawling, most of you guys aren't doing that, and I'm probably... All right, guys, so the big advantage of this, though, is going to be the ride quality that you're going to get out of this IFS front suspension versus a straight axle front suspension. So, you know, like we said, a straight axle is really meant for rock crawling, things of that nature, or ease of installing. But when you get into the IFS front suspension, you're going down, you know, you're in a wash, you're going down a graded road, a bumpy road, a washed out road. You know, there's so many different things that this is just going to be far superior in handling overall versus all of those. Not to mention just daily driving. Every day that you're going to be driving your van, you're going to find yourself that this is such a more comfortable setup as well. Not to mention if you're doing any long distance driving. And that's really what we're targeting this kit for, is for that person that's gonna, you know, they're the adventure hobbyist. They want to go overlanding, they want to go have fun with their van, but they're not, you know, going and getting crazy with it as well. You know, this is designed for that person that, you know, 90% of the time you're driving this thing on the road, you may be doing like what I'm doing, taking my kids to school every day. Well, I would be, but now that nobody's in school. But anyways, guys, the point of this is even with all of these extra moving components, whether either you do a torsion bar kit or a coilover kit, we've really beefed up the majority of the components in order to give you a better ride. I would rather go over everything and tell you every disadvantage that you could possibly run into, but also show you the advantages of doing a kit like this over a straight axle front end is gonna just, in the long term of it, is gonna far outweigh that, in my opinion. So this is a really nice setup. There's a lot of things going on here, and if you guys have questions about either one of these kits, I will be happy to go over all of this with you guys and answer as many questions that I can. And this is all just kind of on the fly, so I'm sure I've missed some things in this because I want to mention, I guess, one other thing that I do not have on my particular van, but what we've built since I built my van is now a sway bar kit, and the sway bar kit actually mounts to the lower control arm. So even if you don't do it at the time of you do the coilover kit, you can always add the sway bar later as an option. And I did notice a big difference in the sway bar setup, as well as not really losing any articulation in the front end with the sway bar on there. So there's not even a need for a quick disconnect on that as well. So I'm thinking I'm missing something, but I'm not sure. I hope you guys understand a little bit more about the difference now between IFS front suspension and a straight axle front suspension. And I think that's it. If I missed something else, I will be back. Comment below, let me know what I missed. I'll be happy to make another one of these videos for you guys talking about anything else. Another thing I'd like to do is maybe get a TTB front end in here and maybe compare that to an IFS or a straight axle as well, because that would be the one other kind of front end that's out there. But I think that's it, guys. I hope you guys found something in this video of man, I can't even think of it, so maybe you didn't. Anyways, smash that thumbs up button, smash that subscribe button, leave a comment below, and I got nothing. That's it. I'll see you guys later.